The planet Doros was not a place of comfort. It was a world of endless red sand stretching far into the horizon. The sky was often a pale orange, and when the sun burned at its highest point, the dunes shimmered like waves of fire. The wind carried grains of sand that cut into skin and metal alike. For most, Doros was a land to avoid, but for humanity it became a home, a place where survival was carved from the ground itself. Long ago, humans left Earth when it could no longer provide them safety. They searched for a place where they could begin again, and after years among the stars, they landed on Doros. It was harsh, yes, but it had water hidden under the dunes, and its soil could grow food if treated with care. More importantly, it was far from the wars and greed that had chased them across the galaxy. The settlement was not grand. It was not filled with towers or shining walls like those seen in alien colonies. Instead, the humans built their shelters low and deep, carved beneath the sand. From above, their homes looked plain, almost invisible, but underground they were strong and warm. Wide tunnels connected the shelters, and thick walls kept the storms outside. To the people of Doros, safety was not in showing strength but in respecting the land they lived on. One of the builders of these shelters was a man named Ryan. He was tall, with skin darkened by the desert sun and hands rough from years of shaping stone. Ryan never spoke much, but when he did, others listened. He was known for patience and calm, even when things went wrong. Children often followed him, asking questions, and he always answered with simple words they could understand. Nearby, another group of settlers had arrived years before. They were called the Zorans. Unlike humans, they loved to build upward. Their homes were tall crystal towers that shone under the desert sun. The towers glittered like jewels in the endless sand, and the Zorans believed this showed their greatness. To them, height was power, and they looked down at the humans with smiles of mockery. They called human shelters caves, and they called the people weak for hiding underground. One evening, a young girl named Myra walked beside Ryan as he inspected one of the tunnels. Myra had large curious eyes and carried endless questions in her heart. She looked at the sand pouring down from a small crack in the ceiling and then at Ryan. "Why do we stay low when the Zorans rise so high?" she asked. "They call us afraid." "Are we afraid?" Ryan placed his hand on the wall, feeling the strength of the stone beneath the sand. "Fear is not the reason we build this way," he said. "The desert does not respect pride. It respects patience. The storm above may roar, but under the sand, we endure." Myra thought about his words. She had seen the Zoran towers glowing at sunset, standing proud against the sky. To her young eyes, they looked beautiful, but she also remembered the way the wind howled against them, shaking their walls. She wondered what would happen if the storm grew stronger. The days on Doros were long, and the nights were even longer. When darkness came, the desert grew cold, and the stars painted the sky in silver lines. Humans gathered in their underground halls, sharing stories and meals. They did not have much, but they had each other. Songs filled the tunnels, soft and steady, carrying warmth through the stone halls. Above, the Zorans lived in shining halls of glass and crystal. Their feasts were filled with lights, and their laughter echoed high above the dunes. When they spoke of humans, it was often with amusement. "They hide like worms," a Zoran elder once said. "They fear the sky itself. When the storm comes, their walls will bury them." His words spread among his people, and the mocking grew louder. Yet the humans remained silent. Ryan knew that storms on Doros were not like storms on Earth. The wind could strip metal and stone in minutes. He had seen storms rise from the horizon like living walls, their roar drowning out all sound. But the shelters he built had survived many storms before. He believed they would continue to stand, no matter how much the Zorans mocked them. One afternoon, Myra played near the edge of the human settlement. She looked toward the distant towers of the Zorans, their crystals glowing under the sun. A group of Zoran children noticed her. They laughed and pointed at her simple clothes. One of them called, "Why hide in holes, little worm?" Myra's cheeks burned with anger, but she turned away. She remembered Ryan's words. The desert respected patience. When night came again, the wind began to rise. Sand brushed against the air with a sharper voice than before. Ryan stood outside for a moment, watching the horizon. The dunes shifted like restless waves, and the sky carried a strange red glow. It was the first sign, though few yet understood it. Doros was whispering of something greater to come. Ryan returned inside and sealed the heavy doors. The people gathered, sensing the change in the air. Children clung to their mothers, and elders whispered old warnings about the rare great storms of Doros. Myra listened with wide eyes. She felt both fear and wonder, not yet knowing that the storm would test all who lived on the planet. And far away, the Zorans feasted in their towers, laughing as if nothing could ever touch them. They looked at their shining walls and believed they would last forever. They did not know that the desert was waiting to remind them of its fury. The sun rose high over Doros, its heat pressing down on the dunes like a heavy hand. The desert stretched wide and endless, a sea of red sand glowing under the orange sky. In the distance, the towers of the Zorans shone brightly. Their crystal walls reflected sunlight in 1,000 colors, and from far away, they looked like sharp blades piercing the horizon. To the Zorans, these towers were symbols of strength. To the humans, they were fragile against the desert's endless wrath. Inside one of the tall towers, a gathering of Zoran elders sat around a round table made of polished glass. They spoke of trade, crops, and the human settlement that lay half a day's walk away. Their voices carried pride, but also amusement. "The humans dig holes and call them homes," said Elder Koraz, his long fingers tapping against the glass. "They cower under the sand like frightened animals." Another elder, Liar, gave a laugh. "And yet they speak of safety. They claim the desert is dangerous. I say they use danger as an excuse for weakness. We stand tall, and the desert bows to us." The others nodded in agreement. For them, height and brilliance were proof of greatness. They believed the desert was meant to be conquered, not respected. In their eyes, humanity had chosen the path of fear. That evening, while the Zorans feasted in their glowing halls, Myra sat with her people in the underground shelter. The air was cooler inside, the walls thick with stone and packed sand. Lamps burned with steady flames, and the smell of baked bread filled the air. The humans ate simple meals, but they shared laughter and stories. For Myra, this warmth felt stronger than the glitter of the towers she had seen from afar. Still, the words of the Zoran children echoed in her mind. She turned to Ryan, who sat quietly at the end of the long table. "Why do they laugh at us?" she asked. "Why do they call us weak?" Ryan lifted his gaze, calm and steady. "Because they believe strength is shown by what rises above the sand," he said. "But strength is not always what others see. Sometimes strength is hidden. Sometimes it waits." Myra thought about his answer. She remembered how the sand shifted in the wind, how the dunes changed shape with every storm. Nothing on Doros ever stood still for long. She wondered if the towers would stand when the desert grew angry. Days passed, and the winds began to stir more often. The air grew hotter, and the sky darkened with strange colors at dusk. To the humans, these were signs. Elders whispered that Doros was entering one of its great cycles, a time when the storms would rise fiercer than in living memory. To the Zorans, the sky was nothing more than a painting, and the wind was only noise. One morning, Myra and her friends were helping to carry water jars through the tunnels. The underground halls echoed with their steps, and their laughter bounced off the stone walls. When they reached the entrance, Myra looked out at the horizon. The Zoran towers glittered under the rising sun. A group of Zoran children played near the base of the towers, running between the crystal beams. Their laughter carried across the sand. It was carefree, almost careless. Later that day, Myra asked her mother, "Do the Zorans never fear the storms?" Her mother shook her head. "They believe their towers will protect them. They think we hide because we are afraid. But they do not know the desert like we do. They have not listened to its voice." Ryan gathered the humans that evening to speak of the coming days. His voice was steady, but his eyes were sharp. "The winds are changing," he said. "The sand will rise higher. We must prepare. Every wall must be checked, every tunnel sealed tight. We will not wait for the storm to remind us." The people listened and obeyed. They had seen storms before, and they trusted Ryan's wisdom. Hammers echoed in the tunnels as workers repaired cracks. Children carried stones and sandbags, learning that survival was the duty of all, young and old alike. Far away, the Zorans gathered in their towers to celebrate the harvest of their crystal gardens. Bright lights shone through their tall windows, and their voices filled the desert night. From their high walls, they looked down at the human settlement and laughed. "The worms prepare again," one of them said. "They fear shadows more than storms." Their laughter grew louder as they raised their crystal cups. But above their towers, the sky began to shift. A strange red glow spread across the horizon, faint at first but growing stronger each night. The winds carried new sounds, low and heavy, like the growl of something unseen. The humans heard it and grew silent. The Zorans heard it and ignored it. Myra stood at the edge of the settlement one evening, her eyes fixed on the faraway towers. She felt the wind pull at her hair and tasted sand in the air. The dunes rolled like restless waves, as if the desert itself was stirring. She remembered Ryan's words about patience and strength. She wondered if the Zorans would ever understand before it was too late. Inside their towers, the Zorans raised their heads proudly, believing nothing could touch them. They trusted their glittering walls. They believed the desert would bow. But the desert was not a servant. It was a force waiting for its time. And its time was drawing near. The winds of Doros grew restless. For days they carried more sand than usual, filling the sky with a constant haze. The sun, once sharp and burning, now appeared as a dull red disk hidden behind shifting clouds of dust. Every step outside felt heavier, as if the desert was warning those who walked upon it. To the humans, these signs could not be ignored. To the Zorans, they were nothing more than passing weather. Ryan stood at the edge of the settlement, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The dunes moved like waves, rolling and shifting with each gust of wind. He knelt down, running his hand across the sand. It was finer than usual, sharp as powder. He felt the weight of it slip through his fingers. Behind him, Myra watched silently. She had learned to study the desert the way Ryan did, as if it spoke in a language only patience could understand. "Is it coming soon?" she asked. Ryan nodded slowly. "The desert is restless. The storm is waking." Myra's heart beat faster. She had heard stories of the great storms that came once in many years. They were storms that swallowed the sky and reshaped the land. Few alive had ever seen one, yet the stories were enough to leave shadows in her thoughts. She glanced toward the distant towers of the Zorans, shining faintly in the dusty light. She wondered if they noticed what was coming. That night, the humans gathered in their main hall. The underground chamber was wide and filled with the soft glow of lamps. Families sat together as Ryan spoke. His voice was calm but firm. "We must be ready. The winds carry more than dust. They carry the voice of the storm. Every shelter must be sealed. Every store of food and water must be checked. We do not know how long it will last." The people nodded, prepared for the work ahead. For them, survival was not a new lesson but a way of life. They had faced storms before, though none as heavy as the one now building on the horizon. They trusted their shelters, carved deep into the sand. They trusted the wisdom of patience. Above, the Zorans continued their lives in glittering halls. They saw the haze in the sky and laughed at the worry of humans. Children ran through the open streets between their tall towers, tossing bright stones and chasing each other in games. Their parents watched with pride, believing their city untouchable. Elder Korra stood on the balcony of the tallest tower, gazing toward the human settlement. He smiled as he saw lights flicker under the sand. "They hide again," he said to those beside him. "They fear the wind itself. Let them stay buried while we stand tall." But the desert was no longer gentle. On the third night, the storm gave its first warning. A wind unlike any before tore across the dunes, carrying sand that cut against stone with a scream. The humans had sealed their doors, their tunnels holding steady against the pressure. Inside, the lamps flickered, and the walls rumbled, but the shelters held firm. The children clung to their mothers, yet no collapse came. Far away, in the Zoran towers, the storm struck with sudden force. The tall walls trembled, and shards of crystal fell from high windows. The people gasped as their homes, once symbols of pride, shook against the fury of the desert. Children cried as the towers swayed, their laughter silenced by fear. The elders called for calm, claiming the walls would endure. But the cracks in the crystal grew wider with every blast of wind. Myra pressed her ear to the underground wall, listening to the roar outside. It sounded like 1,000 voices crying out at once. She felt the ground tremble under her hands. "It is angry," she whispered. Ryan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "The desert does not grow angry," he said. "It only reminds us that it rules this land. We are guests here." When the morning came, the storm eased for a short time. The humans stepped carefully outside to see what damage had been done. The dunes near the settlement had shifted, burying some of their outer wells. But the shelters themselves stood untouched. Sand had flowed over them like water over stone, leaving no scar behind. Myra lifted her eyes toward the distant Zoran city. Her breath caught. One of the tall towers leaned slightly to the side, its top broken into jagged pieces. Even from far away, she could see that something had gone wrong. The towers, once proud and unshaken, were no longer whole. Later that day, word reached the humans. A small group of Zorans arrived, their fine clothes covered in dust, their faces pale with fear. They spoke of windows shattered, of walls cracking under the weight of the storm. Their pride had been shaken, though they still tried to hold their heads high. "It was only a small storm," one said. "Nothing more. The towers will stand again." Yet his voice carried doubt. Ryan listened but gave no answer. He only looked at the horizon, where the sky glowed faintly red once more. The storm that had struck was not the true fury. It was only the first warning. What was coming would test them all, human and Zoran alike. And only those who respected the desert would endure. The desert sky grew darker each day. The sun, once blazing and clear, now struggled to break through the heavy clouds of dust. The air carried a sharp taste of sand, and the dunes shifted faster than before, rising and falling as if the land itself was restless. To the humans, these were the signs of the great storm spoken of in old tales. To the Zorans, they were still nothing more than weather. Pride blinded them from what was coming. Ryan walked through the underground tunnels, checking every wall and every door. His voice carried calm orders. "Seal the outer cracks. Strengthen the beams. No tunnel should be left weak." The people worked quickly, passing stones and sandbags, fixing doors, and storing water. The tunnels echoed with the sound of work, but beneath the noise was silence of worry. They all knew the storm would not be like the smaller ones they had survived before. Myra helped carry small jars of grain into the deeper storerooms. Her hands trembled, though she tried to stay strong. "Ryan," she asked softly, "will our walls hold if the storm grows too big?" Ryan placed his rough hand on the wall and pressed firmly. These walls were made for the desert. They will stand trust the work we have done. His steady tone gave comfort, but his eyes lingered on the ceiling a moment longer than Myra noticed. That night, the storm arrived with its full fury. It came not as a whisper but as a roar. The wind howled like 1,000 beasts, and the sand rose into the sky in endless waves. Outside, the desert disappeared. The world turned into a wall of red and black, a swirling cage of dust and stone. The storm crashed against the Zoran towers with a rage unseen in many lifetimes. The humans sealed themselves underground. The walls trembled, the lamps flickered, and the sound of the storm shook the very air. Yet their shelters held. The sand pressed against them but only flowed over, unable to break the deep roots they had carved. Families huddled close, whispering prayers and songs to comfort one another. Myra clung to her mother's hand, her heart racing with fear and wonder. Never before had she heard the desert roar so loudly. Far away, the Zoran city screamed with chaos. The crystal towers bent under the force, their sharp edges cutting into the storm but breaking in turn. Windows shattered, sending shards across the streets. Bridges between towers cracked and fell, crashing into the dunes below. Zorans ran through their glowing halls, their voices filled with fear. No longer did they laugh at the humans. No longer did they believe the towers were untouchable. Elder Korras stood in the great hall of the tallest tower. Around him, the walls cracked, lines spreading like veins across the crystal. He shouted to his people to stay strong, to hold faith in the towers, but his words were drowned by the scream of the storm. With a thunderous crack, part of the wall gave way, and a rush of sand burst inside. The people scattered in panic, their pride shattered along with the crystal beams. Outside, the towers fell one by one. The storm pulled them down like a hand sweeping across a table. The glittering city that once shone like jewels now broke into ruins buried under the endless tide of sand. Zorans who had once mocked the humans fled toward the ground, their faces covered with fear, their fine clothes torn by dust and wind. Meanwhile, in the human shelters, Myra pressed her ear to the wall. The roar of the storm filled her body, but she could hear no cracks, no breaks. Their underground halls stood firm. She turned to Ryan, her eyes wide. "We are safe." Ryan nodded. "The desert does not destroy those who respect it." Hours passed, then a day, then another. The storm did not end quickly. It raged without pause, drowning the land in sand. Food and water were rationed carefully, and families stayed close to their lamps. Children asked when the sky would return, but no one had the answer. Still, the shelters endured, proving the wisdom of their builders. When at last the storm began to weaken, the world above was unrecognizable. The dunes had shifted into new shapes, mountains of sand rising where plains had once been. The Zoran city was no longer standing. Towers that had once reached proudly into the sky now lay broken, buried beneath layers of red dust. Only fragments of crystal glimmered weakly under the fading light. From the doors of the human shelters, a few figures appeared. Zoran stumbled across the dunes, their bodies bent with exhaustion, their once proud faces pale and frightened. They approached the human settlement, knocking weakly at the heavy doors, begging for shelter. Their voices carried shame, for the people they had mocked were now the only ones who could save them. Myra watched as Ryan stood silently at the door. The cries of the Zorans echoed against the walls. Her heart softened at their pain. "Will we help them?" she asked. Ryan looked at her, his face calm but heavy with thought. "The storm has shown us all the truth. Now we must decide what kind of people we are." The storm had passed, leaving Doros quiet and strange. The red dunes stretched like mountains across the horizon, and the remains of the Zoran city lay buried beneath the sand. The air was sharp and dry, carrying the faint scent of crushed crystal. The humans slowly emerged from their shelters, stepping onto ground reshaped by the storm. Their settlement was unharmed, tunnels and walls still standing firm, proof of careful planning and respect for the desert. Myra stepped out with Ryan behind her. The sun, hidden for days by dust, now peeked faintly above the horizon. She looked toward the dunes where the Zorans had fallen. Small figures moved slowly across the sand, bent and weary. Their crystal towers were gone, leaving them exposed and helpless. Myra's heart ached at the sight. These were the same people who had laughed at her and called their shelters weak. Now they were struggling, defeated by the very land they had ignored. Ryan watched them quietly. He had prepared for this moment. "We will help them," he said softly, as if speaking to himself. "We are human. Strength is not just survival. Strength is also kindness." The humans quickly gathered what they could. Blankets, food, and water were loaded into small carts. Children and elders worked together to carry supplies to the outer doors. Myra joined them, carrying a jug of water carefully across the rough sand. The Zorans approached slowly, unsure of what to expect. They had mocked the humans, but now fear and desperation replaced their pride. One of the Zoran elders, bent with age and dust covering his hair, raised his voice. "We do not need your help," he said, though the crack in his tone betrayed him. "We can find our own way." Ryan stepped forward. "You have been humbled by the desert. Pride alone does not protect you. Accept the help, or risk what remains of your people." His voice was calm, firm, and unshakable. The elder hesitated, then slowly nodded. Others followed in silence, stepping into the human settlement. Their hands shook as they touched the solid walls of the underground halls. The humans led them carefully inside, showing them the tunnels and the rooms they had built. The Zorans were amazed. One young Zoran girl looked around in wonder. "Your homes, they are strong. How did you build them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ryan smiled slightly. "We listened to the desert. We studied it for years. The storm shows who respects the land, not who tries to conquer it." The Zorans walked through the halls with cautious steps. The warmth of the lamps, the smell of fresh bread, and the order of the tunnels surprised them. They had believed height and beauty were strength. Now they saw that strength could be hidden beneath the surface, quiet and steady, yet unbreakable. Myra moved beside the young girl and offered her some bread. "The desert teaches patience," she said simply. "It teaches us to endure, not to show off." Outside, the wind still stirred, but it was weaker now. The storm had passed, leaving silence in its place. Ryan stood at the entrance of the settlement, watching the Zorans recover slowly. Some were injured, but most were shaken by the lesson of the storm. Elder Koraz, the proudest among the Zorans, finally spoke. His voice was low and measured. "We mocked you, thinking you were weak," he said. "The desert showed us our mistake. You are strong in ways we never understood." Ryan nodded. "Strength is not always what others see. Sometimes it is the work we do before the storm. Sometimes it is the care we give, the patience we hold. That is what makes us human." The Zorans remained in the settlement for several days, recovering from the storm's fury. Humans shared their food and water without complaint. They repaired minor injuries and taught the Zorans how to reinforce temporary shelters. Slowly, the alien settlers began to understand the wisdom in human design. Their pride had been broken, but it was replaced by respect. Myra stood outside one morning, looking at the Zoran children who now followed her across the dunes. She showed them how to step carefully on the sand, how to find paths where the wind left firm ground. The children listened, asking questions and learning quickly. Myra realized that the desert had not only tested humans but had also taught the Zorans humility and wisdom. Ryan joined her at the edge of the settlement. "They will rebuild," he said quietly. "But now they will build with knowledge, not arrogance. They will remember the lesson of the storm." Myra smiled. "And we will always have the shelter to survive the next one." The humans had proven their strength, not through weapons or pride, but through patience, planning, and compassion. Even the Zorans, once mocking and proud, now saw that humanity's endurance was greater than any glittering tower. The desert had spoken, and humanity had answered with wisdom and care. The settlement buzzed with quiet activity. Children played safely in the tunnels, adults repaired minor damage, and the Zorans slowly adapted to their new understanding. Outside, the dunes still rolled endlessly, but now the humans and Zorans alike knew that survival depended not on arrogance, but on respect and resilience. The desert had tested all who lived on Doros. The storm had shown fury beyond imagination. Yet humanity remained standing, not only alive but ready to teach and protect. The true strength of humans was no longer hidden beneath the sand. It was visible in their actions, in their hearts, and in the way they chose to help even those who had once scorned them. The desert of Doros was quiet but tense. The storm had passed, leaving a land reshaped by its fury. Red dunes rose higher, forming new valleys, and fragments of Zoran crystal glittered faintly under the sun. The human settlement remained intact, a safe haven amidst the chaos. But Ryan knew the desert would not remain silent for long. The great storm had shown its power, and the wind still carried whispers of its return. The Zorans were slowly recovering. They walked among the tunnels and halls, learning from humans, their pride humbled. Children who once played among broken towers now studied the safe paths across the dunes with Myra. The elders of the Zorans observed quietly, realizing that the humans' patience and planning had saved them when their own towers had failed. Ryan called a meeting in the main hall. Humans and Zorans gathered together, sharing food and supplies. "The desert is alive," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We have survived one storm, but it may return stronger. We must work together to prepare. Pride alone will not protect anyone." Elder Koraz nodded slowly. "We see now that we cannot conquer the desert. We can only respect it and learn from those who understand it." His words carried weight. The humans had not only survived but had also taught humility and wisdom. Myra walked among the Zoran children, showing them how to carry water without spilling, how to build small wind barriers to protect supplies, and how to read the movement of sand across the dunes. The children listened eagerly, their fear replaced by curiosity. They learned quickly, understanding that survival required patience and care, not arrogance. Over the next few days, the humans and Zorans worked side by side. Walls were reinforced, tunnels extended, and storage rooms strengthened. Supplies were carefully rationed, and warning systems were built to detect shifts in the wind. Every person had a role. Even the youngest children helped, carrying small stones or stacking sandbags under the guidance of adults. Ryan stood at the edge of the settlement one evening, watching the red sun dip behind the dunes. The sky was still tinged with a faint orange glow, and the air carried the faint scent of sand. He could see distant clouds forming on the horizon, moving in patterns that made him uneasy. The desert was calm now, but calm was often the quiet before a greater test. Myra approached him, holding a small bundle of supplies for the Zorans. "Do you think the storm will come again?" she asked. Ryan looked at her with steady eyes. "It may," he said. "The desert does not forget. It only waits. We have learned from it, and now we must be ready." That night, a soft wind blew across the dunes, carrying with it a strange sound. It was not yet a roar, but it was different from the usual whisper of the desert. The humans and Zorans both noticed it. Inside the tunnels, children pressed close to their parents, sensing something unusual. Outside, the Zorans looked up at the sky with unease. Their towers were gone, leaving no shelter but the underground halls of the humans. Ryan gathered everyone in the central chamber. "The desert is testing us once more," he said. "We must stay calm. Every wall, every tunnel, every plan we have made will be needed. Trust the work you have done and trust each other." The humans prepared quietly, checking lamps, food, and water. The Zorans, still learning, followed instructions carefully. Some hesitated, but Ryan reminded them, strength is not about fearlessness. It is about understanding and action. Do not let pride stop you from surviving. Myra walked to the outer entrance with a small group of children. She looked across the dunes and saw the faint rise of sand on the horizon. It is coming, she whispered, though no one panicked. The humans had learned to face the desert's fury with calm minds. As night fell, the wind grew slightly stronger, stirring the sand into gentle waves. The stars above were faint behind a thin veil of dust. Both humans and Zorans felt a mix of fear and anticipation. This was not the storm itself, but a warning. The desert was reminding everyone that it was alive, and that survival required respect, preparation, and unity. Ryan stood in the central chamber, his hands resting on the table. Tomorrow may be the greatest challenge yet, he said. But we are ready. Not because we are fearless, but because we work together. The desert tests all who live here, but it favors those who listen and act wisely. Myra looked around at the faces of humans and Zorans alike. There was fear, but also determination. She knew the storm could return at any moment, fiercer than before. Yet she also knew that humanity's strength was not just in surviving the storm, but in teaching others to endure as well. Outside, the dunes whispered in the soft wind. The desert was quiet, but it was not forgiving. It waited, patient and powerful. And the humans, standing with their new allies, were ready to meet it. The calm was fragile, but it held the promise of what was to come. The sky above Doros had turned a deep red. The wind howled like a living creature, carrying sand in heavy waves across the dunes. The calm that had lasted for days was gone, replaced by the roar of the great storm returning. Humans and Zorans alike stood inside the tunnels, listening to the sound above. It was the loudest they had ever heard, the desert showing its full fury. Ryan moved among the people, checking walls, doors, and stored supplies. His eyes were sharp, but his voice remained calm. Remember everything we have done, he said. Stay together. Trust the tunnels, trust each other. Myra ran through the halls, helping children and carrying extra lamps. Her heart raced, but she did not panic. She had seen the storm's power before, and she had learned the value of patience and preparation. Every step she took was careful, every action deliberate. She knew that rushing would only bring danger. The Zorans watched from behind the human walls, their pride replaced with understanding. Elder Korras had spoken to them earlier, reminding everyone that survival required humility. They moved quickly, carrying supplies and helping reinforce weak points. The humans taught them, guiding their hands, showing them how to work with the desert instead of against it. Outside, the storm struck. Waves of sand hit the tunnels with a pressure that made the ground tremble. The roar filled every crevice, shaking the lights in their sockets. The Zorans' old towers would have collapsed instantly. Their people had learned the hard lesson of pride, and now they relied entirely on the humans' shelters. Ryan walked to the entrance and looked at the dunes. The wind carved shapes in the sand like rolling mountains. He could see the remnants of what had once been the Zoran city. Crystal fragments glittered faintly but were buried under sand, a reminder of how quickly arrogance could fail. He returned inside, knowing the humans were safe because they had built with wisdom, not beauty. The storm raged through the night. Families huddled together, children pressed close to their parents, and the Zorans stayed quiet, learning how to endure. Food and water were carefully rationed, and every person moved with care. Even the smallest actions mattered. Every stone placed, every door sealed, every word of encouragement was part of surviving the storm. Myra sat beside a small group of Zoran children, showing them how to measure the wind and listen to the shifting dunes. The desert speaks to us, she said softly. It tells us where it is safe and where danger waits. If we listen, we can survive. The children nodded, their eyes wide with wonder and respect. As the storm reached its peak, Ryan stood at the central chamber, looking at all the people around him. "We have done all we can," he said. "The desert tests everyone who lives here. Some will fall because they do not listen. We will endure because we respect it, and because we work together." Hours passed, and slowly, the storm began to weaken. The roar of the wind became less harsh, the waves of sand smaller, and the sky started to brighten. When morning came, the dunes stretched vast and still. The Zorans emerged first, blinking against the light. They looked around at the landscape, then at the human settlement. Their faces were filled with awe. Elder Korras stepped forward and spoke. "We mocked you once," he said. "We thought strength was in height and beauty. Now we see that strength is in wisdom, patience, and care. You have taught us humility and survival." Ryan nodded. "Strength is not always what others see. It is built in silence and preparation. It is shown in how we help others, even those who once scorned us." Myra walked through the settlement with the Zoran children, showing them the tunnels and the reinforced walls. "This is how we survive," she said. "Not by towers or pride, but by respect and planning. This is our way." The children listened, understanding more than words could teach. The Zorans began to rebuild with the humans. Together they dug small shelters, reinforced weak points, and carried water and supplies. They learned the patterns of the desert, how to protect themselves, and how to work with the land. The humans guided them, not with pride, but with quiet leadership. By the end of the day, the settlement had grown stronger than before. The dunes remained powerful, but the people inside had learned to respect them. The desert had tested all who lived there. Some had fallen, some had survived by chance, and some had endured through wisdom. Humanity had proven that endurance, care, and intelligence could triumph over force. Myra looked out over the dunes, the Zoran children beside her. The sun reflected off the sand in a soft orange glow. "We survived," she said softly. "And now they will survive too." Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Yes," he said. "This is our legacy. Not just that we endure, but that we teach others how to endure with us. Respect, patience, and compassion are stronger than any tower." The Zorans no longer mocked the humans. They no longer called their shelters weak. They had learned the lesson of Doros. The storm had come, it had roared with all its fury, and humanity had stood firm, ready to guide those who had once scorned them. The desert had tested them, and humanity had proven that their strength was not only in survival, but in the wisdom to endure, and the courage to teach others to do the same. And so, under the endless red dunes of Doros, the humans' shelters remained safe. Humanity's legacy was written not in glittering towers, but in the quiet strength of those who knew how to listen, prepare, and care for all who lived on the desert world.